right, it's preparing to stream, so we're loading in there now. Should be live any second now. All right, and we are officially live on YouTube. So everyone, just so you know, because we are streaming live on YouTube, that does mean that the recording will be available afterward. So if you want to send it to friends and fam, you can. I'll put the YouTube link in the chat if you want to go ahead and start sharing that. Actually, I think I'll tweet it out and tag Nature, the USA NPN Twitter, and the Timberland Regional Library Twitter, just so as many people join us as possible. And I see a few. It looks like Robin from Kingston, Washington is tuning in. Hello, Robin. I see Victor Sunday's on the line. Everyone, Victor is from Nigeria. So he's joining us, which is exciting. But yeah, feel free to say hello, everybody. I'm just getting this tweet out the door so people can discover this. Always a fun thing to do. Let's also post on Facebook too, just so as many people can see it as possible. All right. And we're 1 minute to start time, so if you haven't said hello in the chat yet, feel free to go ahead and do that. USA National Phenology Network and at Timberland Regional Library. All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. It's right at 3 o'clock Pacific time. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. We really appreciate it. We're excited to learn with you, to do, to hopefully jumpstart you in citizen science. And Victor just said hello in the chat. Hello, Victor. Awesome, awesome. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can go ahead and get started. And I want to give a big thank you to our partners in this event today, the Timberland Regional Library in Washington State, as well as the United States National Phenology Network, specifically the Nature's Notebook Citizen Science Project. You know, even if you're not in Washington State and you're tuning in from somewhere else just to learn about phenology and seasons and how you can study those things with citizen science, you're really welcome as well. All are welcome here. But for those of you at the Timberland Regional Library, you know, those patrons in that network, I'm really jealous of you because you all have a really cool library. So we're going to get started with a poll. We just want to know, have you ever participated in a citizen science project before? And if you're watching on YouTube, feel free to chime in the YouTube comments. And if you're watching on Zoom, please vote in the Zoom poll. So we just want to know, have you ever participated in a citizen science project before? And you know, you might not even know what citizen science is. You might have just stumbled upon this event. And you're like, what's SciStarter? What's citizen science? That's okay. You're going to learn about what those things are during this event. It looks like about 75% of you have done citizen science before. One person hasn't. Totally okay. You're in the right place to learn how to get started. So we'll end the poll and share those results. And then let's do our next poll. We just want to know a little bit about you. So are you an aspiring citizen scientist? Are you a parent of an aspiring citizen scientist? Are you a teacher, an educator, a troop leader, etc.? Are you a librarian or part of a library staff? Are you a researcher or a project leader? Are you just a bored person on the internet? Are you a patron of Timberland Regional Library? Or are you none of these? Feel free to answer. No answer is a bad answer. Whoever you are welcome here. This citizen science is for everybody, and so is this event. So it looks like of the people who have voted so far, we have some library staff represented in the house. We have an aspiring citizen scientist with us. Go ahead and get your votes in the poll. Just doing this, it helps us know, kind of who we're talking to today and who's with us in this event. We have some researchers and project leaders here. Very cool. Last chance to vote. I'm going to close the poll in about 3, 2, 1, and end poll. So we have aspiring citizen scientists, library staff members, and researchers with us today, and some people tuning in on YouTube as well. So now I'm going to pass the mic to Donna, who's going to tell us what's new with the Shelton Timberland Library. Donna, take it away.
One of the first things that I wanted to promote is this Nature Remedies calendar that we have coming out in the next couple weeks. So if you live in Mason County, Washington, or if you visit the area, look for this. We'll have it at the library. We're not actually open right now, but we will probably have it with our curbside service available and some other places around the county. The library participates as a partner and a coalition member for the Shelton Substance Abuse Prevention Education Partners. And this is just something we put together. It's a free calendar, and these are mindful exercises that you can do in nature. Mason County is a beautiful area of Washington, and people really enjoy outdoor activities. This year, the bonus is that every month we're going to be promoting a new citizen science activity with links to the SciStarter website so you can learn more. So that is the calendar. And then the next slide, please. We are not open right now. The news this week is that the governor has lifted some of the restrictions and given some guidance about how libraries can be open during, I don't even know what phase it is. If he's on phase 3, we're on phase 2.5 for our reopening. We are doing takeout service right now. This is available 1 to 5 on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. And we are currently working on plans to expand those hours and start providing some limited computer service. And so look for some of those updates coming soon. We are working on doing a bit more there. And while we remain closed and just available to take out service, if you're looking for something that you have not specifically put a hold on, if you'd like us to browse the shelves for you, you can always give us a call or go online to our online chat on www.trl.org and let us know that you're into cozy mysteries or your kid's looking for books on dinosaurs, and we'll put together a grab bag for you. While you're on our website, please also take a look at all of our online events. We have a lot of children's story times going on and events for teens, like our drama workshops and our Dungeons and Dragons activities for teens. These are all on Zoom or on YouTube. And we do have some speakers and some adult activities going on as well. So if you're missing the library and library programs, you can still do those online. Thank you.
So cool. Thank you, Donna. And thank you to the whole Timberland Regional Library. So now we're going to get to citizen science. What is it? At SciStarter, we tend to think of it as a collaboration. It's between scientists and those of us who are curious, concerned, and motivated to make a difference. And the good news is anyone can be a citizen scientist. Anyone can volunteer their time and turn their own curiosity into impact by doing citizen science. And it spans every type of scientific discipline. It's everything from astronomy to health to phenology, the study of seasons, to ecology and everything in between. So whatever you're interested in, I promise there's a citizen science project for you. And you can do it at any age. So we have Girl Scouts that we work with who do citizen science projects, and we have retirees we work with who are doing citizen science projects. So you could do citizen science throughout your entire life. And you don't need really any special training to get started. You just need to follow the project instructions. So today, Erin from Nature's Notebook is going to tell you, give you some tips about how to do Nature's Notebook, a really awesome citizen science project. And she's also going to talk a little bit about the research you're contributing to. One thing that comforts me as a citizen scientist myself is I don't need to know every detail of the science to make a meaningful impact. I just have to follow the steps, and then I'm able to do citizen science. So one example is the Stall Catchers Project. It's an Alzheimer's research project where you analyze videos in a video game format to literally make annotations for researchers of Alzheimer's disease to speed up the search for a cure. And do I know every single detail behind the different treatments they're testing? No, I have absolutely no idea. But do I know how to analyze those videos? Yes, I've gone through the training. I'm able to say, yes, that's a stalled blood vessel. No, that's a flowing blood vessel. And by following those steps and volunteering my time, I'm able to take action on an issue I'm really passionate about, curing Alzheimer's disease, searching for a cure to this disease that's affected so many people we know and love. So that's just one example of how you as a volunteer can really make a difference with citizen science. And if you like being outside, if you like exploring your community, if you need a project that's at home that you can do on your computer, there are so many different projects you can search on SciStarter. So SciStarter is basically the connector, the bridge between you and the projects that need your help. So at this event today, we're so delighted to be able to host Nature's Notebook so we can help spread the word and get you involved in that project. And we organize thousands of projects, events, and tools on SciStarter. So folks come to us when they might want an easy way for volunteers to be able to find them. So a great way to get started is to make a SciStarter account. And you can go to our scistarter.org/NLM page to get started and make your account. That's a page where Nature's Notebook is actually featured on that page. And it's an easy page where you can access different recordings, make your account, and maybe like read some more resources. We have a tutorial featured on that page. It's just kind of a place where it's a little less overwhelming than the main website, because you might be thinking, oh my gosh, thousands of science projects I can explore. That's kind of stressful. Well, if you go to the scistarter.org and LM page, we have 10 featured right there, including Nature's Notebook, to get you started. And when you discover a project on SciStarter, you're usually going somewhere else to do the project. So that Stall Catchers project I mentioned, that's a project where they have their own website. They've built their whole game interface, but because it's a SciStarter affiliate, by using the same email address on Stall Catchers and on SciStarter, so for your Stall Catchers account and your SciStarter account, you're able to keep track of the number and the frequency of your contributions in your SciStarter dashboard. And the good news is Nature's Notebook is actually a SciStarter affiliate as well. So there's that tracking in the back end, which can be really useful. For example, if you're an educator and you want your students to do citizen science across a few different projects and you want to keep track of it, or just for yourself, if you want to try a few different citizen science projects and do them regularly, and you want to keep track of all the amazing contributions you're doing in your SciStarter dashboard, you could go back and see, oh my gosh, I contributed 5 times on this date to this project. I'm amazing. So we do that so you can keep track of it for yourself. And so for programs, if you're involved in like a library program, for example, or if you're an educator working with students, that you could also have some statistics as well. And we're so grateful for the SciStarter affiliates. I always call them the super projects because as you can see, like Aaron being here tonight, like so many of these citizen science projects really go above and beyond to get participants involved, to make you real partners in this process, and trying to discover new things and understand the world. So also on this page, I mentioned scistarter.org/NLM. We have the Introduction to Citizen Science tutorial. It's super fun. We made it in partnership with the National Library of Medicine and Arizona State University. It's interactive. There are a few quizzes. There are some videos. You get a certificate at the end. And it's for all ages. And it just basically goes over the what, the how, the who, and the why of citizen science. So if you want to dig a little deeper, maybe you're new to citizen science or you've done it before and you just want a refresher, I really recommend this tutorial. And it's also an easy way to introduce your friends and family to citizen science. If they don't know what it is, you could just literally hand it to them, give them this link and say, hey, go here, click through this tutorial. It'll tell you everything you need to know. And now it's my absolute delight to introduce Erin from Nature's Notebook. She's going to talk a little bit about the research outcomes. She's going to talk a little bit about how to participate. And I can't wait for her to help you get started. If you want to find Nature's Notebook, it's featured on the scistarter.org/NLM page, and it also has a profile on SciStarter. And of course, Nature's Notebook, you can always discover it on their website or through the app. But enough from me. I put the description of Nature's Notebook here. Basically, it's the study of phenology, the study of seasons. But I won't go over this. Erin's going to talk to you about how to take the pulse of the planet. So I'll stop sharing here, and I'll let Erin share her screen.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm really grateful to SciStarter and the libraries to be partnering with you for this event to be able to talk about fall phenology. So let me share my screen. All right. Everybody see that?
Yep, we can see it.
Awesome. All right, so what I'm going to be talking to you about today is really the signs of the seasons, as Carolyn said. We've just entered calendar fall, and sometimes that doesn't really mean much for the plants and animals around us. We really have to look at what's going on in the environment to know when fall is actually happening. So I wanted to start out first by having you picture some signs of fall that you think about. So what are some things that have to do with plants and animals that you think about with autumn? And you can put them in the chat. And maybe, I don't know if Carolyn can read any of them out. I can't see the chat right now, but if there's anything that comes to mind when you think about fall, there's a picture on my screen here that might be one of the main ones, but there are
Leaves.
certainly others.
Changing colors of leaves.
Yeah, that's a real big one.
I'll monitor the chat for you. One thing I thought of is I'm in Florida, so fall looks a little different for us than it might look
Yep.
in other states.
Thank you for that lead into my next slide. So I am located here in Tucson, Arizona. Hoping that my slide will advance. I might have to click the little button. There we go.
And we actually had some things in the chat. People said, because we're with Washington State today virtually, we're zooming in with you folks. People said colder weather, squirrels burying nuts, and robins in their lawn.
Oh, great. So I should give a little background on myself too. I didn't do that when I got started, but I actually grew up in Seattle, so I'm very familiar with Washington phenology. And I loved the outdoors when I was younger. I used to make my friends collect bugs with me. I remember going to Loon Lake in Eastern Washington every summer, and I would make my sister play Wilderness Girls. We would go out and pretend like we were surviving in the wild and make shelters and find food. So I have very fond memories of Washington State. And very fond memories of libraries too. And I love my local library here in Pima County. We have a great library system with a really neat seed bank program where you can actually check out seeds from the library. So I just love libraries as well. So I was always really interested in plants and animals. And when I realized in high school that I could actually do it for a career, I was just totally set on that path. And my background's in environmental biology, and I ended up coming here to Tucson, Arizona to do a master's in wildlife conservation. And I love the desert here. We have the Sonoran Desert, which is an amazing place. We have this really neat weather pattern with a dual monsoon season where we have summer monsoons and then winter monsoons as well. And so it's created this amazing biodiversity that we have here. And so some pictures on the screen here show some of our signs of fall, which might not be something that you think of up in Washington or wherever you're calling in from. But some of the plants here, there's a milkweed. So this is a desert milkweed up on the left there. It's a very drought tolerant plant. You can see that there are very tiny leaves on it. And then the bottom picture there is a close up of the flowers, which might not look like typical flowers, but it's a very important source of nectar in the fall here for monarchs and other butterflies. I actually saw a queen butterfly flying around my yard today. And we've had a very, very warm year in Arizona this year. Our summer was the hottest on record. We had hardly any monsoon. So it's really impacted the timing of how things are happening here this fall. I also have a picture of one of my backyard residents. I have a desert tortoise through a captive program here through Arizona Game and Fish. And she usually is hibernating by now in October. But this year, because it's been so warm, she's still cruising around. And I just saw her yesterday making a loop around the backyard. We have lots of fruits still on the cactus, and typically those might be gone by now in a different year. And then the bottom right is kind of our version of fall foliage. It's an ocotillo, which is a really cool plant that is very dependent on rainfall. And that is showing our little colored leaves there for Tucson. So if we move on to a place that might be more typical of fall, these pictures are from Salem, Massachusetts. One of my coworkers at the NPN lives there, and she works remotely from Massachusetts. And so she took these amazing pictures of fall foliage. So this might be something that's a little bit more like what you think of fall. So beautiful colors and deciduous trees that are starting to lose their leaves as the temperatures cool. And then we can go up to Washington State. So my family is still in Washington, and they sent me these pictures over the weekend. Just a variety of different fruits that you can see up on the plants right now. So there's a Mahonia on the left, Nuka rose in the middle, and then a vine maple with its really interesting seeds that have wings on them. So lots of different things happening up there right now. So when we talk about the signs of fall, it's really linked to temperature and precipitation. So all different parts of the weather. And I wanted to put this map up here just to give you an idea of what kind of a summer we've had this year, because the timing of when things happen with phenology really is linked to climate in a lot of situations. Some things respond to day length, which doesn't really change each year. It's the same thing every year. But often it's really having to do with what is happening in that particular season with the climate. So this year, this shows the minimum temperature at locations across the country. As I said, in Arizona here, we've had a very hot summer. So from July to September, it was the record warmest. Up in Washington State, you've also been ahead of normal. So seeing much above average temperatures. And then up in Massachusetts as well, they've seen warm weather. So I don't know if that reflects what you've been seeing up in Washington. Maybe things are happening a little more slowly in terms of leaf color change because things are sticking, or the warm temperatures are sticking around longer than normal. And then we can also look at the precipitation as well. It looks like up in Washington, it's been a pretty much normal year for precipitation, whereas here in Arizona, it's been very dry. It's our record driest year. So phenology as a science has been around for a very long time. So people have been using phenology to decide when to take different actions, like planting crops, knowing when to harvest different things in the wild, and then knowing when different animals are active. And so here's an example of different moons that have been used by indigenous people. So things like the full worm moon, the strawberry moon, the corn moon, really let people know when to expect different things to happen. There's also a number of different, what we call different aspects of tradition and lore. So things like you should harvest corn when oak leaves are the size of a mouse's ear. Once lilac flowers have faded, plant squash and cucumbers. When crabapple and wild plum are at bud break, eastern tent caterpillars are hatching. So I don't know if you guys have heard of any other ones, but if you've heard of any other ones, I'd love to hear about it. I kind of collect these, so you can put those in the chat as well, and I'll look at them later. In Western science, there have been a number of people that have been thinking about phenology for a very long time. So Thomas Jefferson used to keep records of phenology at his home in Monticello. John Wesley Powell, an explorer back in the 1800s, would also document the timing of different plants and animals and their activities. Henry David Thoreau kept a very detailed set of records at Walden Pond. And Aldo Leopold and his daughter Nina also kept records at the shack. And it's really important that we have these records because it provides a look at what's happened with phenology and how it's changed over time. So it really shows how important it is to document this kind of information. So we've actually had a couple studies that have come out in the last couple of decades that have looked at how things have changed in recent decades compared to 100 or 150 years ago. So in the case of Thoreau, he kept these detailed records of when he first saw flowers on different plants. And when we compare that timing to today, it's actually much earlier now than it used to be. Some of that has to do with the urban heat island effect. The fact that Walden Pond is now located in more of an urban area has really changed when those plants are flowering. And then also with some of the records kept by Aldo Leopold and his daughter, they used to keep track of when they would first see sandhill cranes and geese. And that's actually happening 2 to 3 weeks earlier now than it did back when they were recording. So there are lots and lots of applications of phenology. We can think about human health. So things like allergy season is directly related to phenology when the flowers are open on trees and they're releasing their pollen. Also activity of disease vectors like mosquitoes and ticks. That's linked very directly to climate when it's warm enough for mosquitoes and ticks to be active, when there's enough moisture in the soil for ticks to move around. That can really increase the timing of these diseases, because if you have a longer season when those bugs can be active, you can have a lot more disease transmission and you can have worse things like Lyme disease season. Also resource management, just knowing about when different species are active, and conservation, things like invasive species, knowing when to treat those things, when those invasive species are going to be active, so you can know when to, for example, spray for forest pests. Agriculture, knowing when to harvest crops, but also when pests that affect agricultural crops are going to be active, and knowing when to treat those. Understanding hazards. So this year we've had a terrible fire season along a lot of the West Coast. A lot of that has to do with the phenology of the plants. So if you have a really early spring, there's a lot of plants that are growing, a lot of high fuel load. If the temperatures stay hot, those plants can dry out, and then you have a really high fuel load. So lots of applications to how bad the fire season is going to be in a particular year. And then also recreation. So we're in fall. A lot of people are traveling around the eastern part of the United States right now, looking at leaves. And that's a really big part of the economy there, is knowing when that's going to happen. Because it's been fluctuating so much lately, it's really hard for people to know when to expect tourists, and plan for that. And then that happens with other festivals too, like flower festivals, especially things like the Cherry Blossom Festival in DC. Knowing when that's going to happen has been really variable in the last few years. So phenology is also a great indicator of climate change. Because it's so closely linked to the climate, it's a really easy way to see what is the impact of the climate changes on plants and animals. And because it's something that's so easy to observe, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change stated that it's one of the simplest processes that we can use to track the responses of plants and animals to a changing climate. And there are lots of shifts that are happening. So this is a paper that looked at different ways that things can shift and how that can impact the growing season or the activity season of different plants and animals. So you can think about a shift that happens where it's kind of equal, where the first of that season and the end of that season both shift. But it can also change so that the season extends. You can have plants that leaf out earlier and lose their leaves later. So you end up with a longer growing season. And you might think that's a good thing, right? You have trees that are leafed out for longer, they're uptaking carbon, and that's good. But it actually can end up being a bad thing in the long term, because those trees are taking up a lot more water. There's not a lot of water available. We're dealing with drought in many places. And so the trees get stressed, and they can actually be more susceptible to things like insects in the future. So it's not always a good thing. We can also see a shortening of the season as well, when maybe the onset of the season shifts early, but then the end season also restricts, or the season starts later and then the end of the season is the same. So you could see even a shorter growing season or activity period. So one example of this is a really well-studied system that's in Europe. There's a bird called the pied flycatcher. It winters in northern Africa, and each spring it uses the timing of or the angle of the sun to know when to migrate up to Europe. And it always does this at the same time of year, because it's using the length of the day or the angle of the sun. And it's over many, many generations timed its migration so that it arrives when its babies in their nest will have caterpillars available. So the adults will be able to go out and collect caterpillars to bring home to their nestlings. But in recent years, this has been shifting. Let's see if my animation works. So that this is actually the abundance of the caterpillars is shifting earlier, because they're feeding on these oak leaves that are just the tiny leaves that are coming out in the springtime. And those are happening earlier. And so the caterpillars are hatching earlier. But the birds, because they're still arriving at the same time, because the length of the day is always the same, they're arriving too late. So when the caterpillars are most abundant, the eggs are still in the nest and the chicks haven't hatched yet. So by the time the chicks actually hatch, they've missed that really important period of caterpillars. And so they've seen a lot of decreases in the population of birds there because they just don't have enough food and the nestlings don't survive. We've seen very similar effects here with some of the birds in the eastern United States. So this is a study from a few years ago that looked at how birds are keeping up with the changing of the timing of spring. So these are deciduous trees in the United States are also leafing out earlier because of the warmer springtime temperatures. And then the insects that are feeding on those leaves are also shifting earlier. But there's a number of bird species that just aren't keeping up with those shifts. And so these are nine songbirds that have been identified as ones that just aren't able to keep up with those changes in the phenology of the trees and the insects. And another example of this kind of how this change can impact the environment is in the early springtime, especially in deciduous forests, there's a period of time when it's really important for the things that live on the forest floor because the trees don't have leaves, so there's a lot of sunlight that can filter down onto the forest floor. And so these small wildflowers and little spring ephemerals, there's like really early season plants, they're able to take advantage of that sunlight. But in recent years, the deciduous trees have been taking advantage of the earlier springs and shifting to leaf out earlier. And so their canopies are covering up the forest floor at that time when the wildflowers really need the sunlight. And the wildflowers aren't able to shift as well as the big trees are. So they're seeing a big decrease in those plants in those kinds of ecosystems. And then here are some examples of some shifts that are happening in the Northwest. So we've seen that sockeye salmon are migrating earlier, lilac and honeysuckle flowers are blooming earlier. The breeding behavior of northern flickers is also changing because of the temperature changes there. And then the temperature and the snow accumulation is also impacting western toads in the Northwest as well. So a lot of changes happening up there. So with all of these changes happening, there was a realization back around 2007 that we really needed to have a national network to be able to keep track of all these things that are happening and have a national way to store phenology data from across the country. So the USA National Phenology Network was established. We're located here at the University of Arizona here in Tucson. And we really have a number of different objectives. We're trying to advance the science of phenology. We're trying to inform natural resource managers, so people working in national parks and national wildlife refuges, to give them the information that they need to make decisions that have to do with phenology. And then to communicate and connect about phenology, to share information about what's happening with the public so that they can make decisions. And then also to create an equitable and diverse network. We want to make sure that phenology information is available to everyone and everyone has a say in the kind of information that is collected and how it's distributed. So our program, Nature's Notebook, is the way that we get the phenology data into our national phenology database. So here's an example of a couple different ways to participate. We have people that are inputting data via an app that we have, and then you can also use the old-fashioned paper data sheets and collect information on plant and animal activity. So the way that this works is we have a set of questions for each of the species on our list. And we have over 1,300 different species now on the Nature's Notebook list that you can observe. So there's something for everyone in each part of the country. I wanted to show you an example for the plant that I mentioned early on, which is the desert milkweed. So I have a number of these in my backyard, and we do recommend having a couple different individual plants if you're monitoring something in Nature's Notebook, because sometimes things act really differently. So if you can monitor just one tree or one shrub or one plant, but if you monitor 2 or 3, you can really see the variation that happens in between them. And sometimes you'll be surprised at how different things happen among the different individual plants, even in your own yard. So I have 3 different desert milkweeds that I monitor. And so these are the questions that are on the data sheet for milkweed. So it's asking you things like, do you see leaves? Do you see flowers or flower buds? Do you see open flowers? Do you see fruits? Do you see ripe fruits? And do you see recent fruit or seed drop? And we want to make sure that this is as easy as possible. So we have a lot of resources available for people when they're making their observations. So on the right here, you can see for each of the questions that we're asking, we have a very detailed description about what exactly we mean, because we don't want you to guess at what we're trying to ask you. So we have a very detailed description that says that flowers or flower buds is one or more fresh open flowers, opened or unopened flowers or flower buds that are visible. And then if you look at the definition for open flowers, you can see that the difference from flowers or flower buds and open flowers is that the flowers are considered open when the reproductive parts are visible between or within the unfolded or open flower parts. So we want to make sure that you know exactly what you're looking for. And so if I was looking at this plant here, you can't really see the leaves in this picture, but there are leaves on the plant. So I would say, yes, there are leaves. Yes, there are flowers or flower buds, and yes, there are open flowers. And you can see the difference in between the buds and the open flowers in the picture there. But I don't see any fruits or ripe fruits or recent fruit drop. We also ask you about the intensity of that question. So you can estimate how many you're seeing. So on this plant, I would count how many individual flowers that are clustered do I see on this plant. And then I would put my estimate into one of those bins there. So it might be less than 3, 3 to 10, 11 to 100, and so on. And then for open flowers, we're looking for a percentage. So if you're estimating, for example, the percentage of this cluster, I might say that it's a little less than half of those flowers are open. And so that really gives information about when the peak happens in that question or that life cycle. So someone who's using the data can see not only when did the flowers open and when was the nectar available for the butterflies, but when was the most amount of nectar available, that peak in that what we call a phenophase or a life cycle event. So you can, I mentioned that we have 2 different ways that you can input the data. You can use our app, which makes it really simple. You just go out and you record your observations when you're outside in your backyard, and the data go right into the database. You can also print out paper data sheets and then enter those online in an interface that looks very similar to the data sheets. So your observations make a huge difference, and you are part of a very large network of observers across the country. So we have over 19,000 active observers that have participated in Nature's Notebook. And you can see how these people are distributed across the country. And you might notice some patterns in this map. We have a lot of people that are participating in urban areas. So you can see that the circles kind of follow where the cities are on the map. So we're always looking to fill in the gaps if you're located, especially in the Southeast or the Great Plains or the Great Basin. We're always looking for more people in those areas. But every observation is important. So even if you live in one of the places that we have a lot of data, we still want you to participate, and we would love to have your data as well. We have over 23 million records now in the National Phenology Database. So there's a lot there for scientists and natural resource managers and the public to explore. So going back to my milkweed plant, this plant that I'm observing is part of this bigger system of people that are collecting observations of milkweeds all across the country. So this is the genus of milkweeds, the Asclepias. We're people that are observing a lot of different species in that genus across the country. And this map shows the first date for open flowers for all of these different locations across the country. So you can see that some of them were flowers that leaked out really early in the spring, and some of them were a little bit later in the summertime. And all of those plants are really important for monarch butterflies as they migrate north in the springtime. They take advantage of the nectar of those plants, as well as they rely on those plants to lay their eggs on, because the caterpillars can only eat milkweed leaves. So they're very important for that species. So in addition to that campaign, which is called Nectar Connectors, we have a number of other campaigns that you can participate in. And these campaigns have been started by researchers or natural resource managers who come to us and they say, I really need data on this particular species or this set of species. And so in the case of Nectar Connectors, we worked with the Fish and Wildlife Service, and they really, because the monarch butterfly is at risk, they really needed data on how their nectar availability is changing across the country. So we started a campaign a number of years ago, and we have all those people that you saw on the previous map that are reporting on milkweeds, as well as a number of other nectar species across the country. And we have a lot of other campaigns. I think we are going to have 9 total campaigns this fall and in winter. So there's something for anyone across the country. So people up in Western Washington, you can participate in the Green Wave campaign, which I'll be talking more about in a minute. And then you can look on the map, and this is on our website as well, to see all the different campaigns that are available for your location. And Nectar Connectors as well is also available in Western Washington. And then the Pest Patrol campaign, which is it's focused on a number of different insect and agricultural pests that we're tracking. So if you have like an apple tree in your yard, we're looking for things like apple maggot. And there's 13 different pest species on that list. So the Green Wave campaign, I wanted to talk about this one because it's focused on a couple different things related to phenology. One is the green up of deciduous trees in the springtime. So this animation is showing what you can see from satellites in the change in the greenness across the country, across North America, really, in the springtime. So it's this wash of green that goes from the south up to the north. And that's actually what those migratory birds are following as the leaves are coming out and the caterpillars are hatching. They're taking advantage of that as well. And so this campaign is focused on when that green up is happening. And so we can figure out how it's related to different temperature and precipitation aspects of the environment. And we're also interested in the flowering of those trees as well, because it's related to things like allergies. And we're also interested in when those trees are changing color in the fall. So especially right now, the fall leaf color change is a really important part of that campaign. And we've learned a number of different species. This campaign has been going on for 8 years now, I think. And so researchers have started to learn different things about the trees that are part of this campaign. They've been looking at how our on-the-ground observations can kind of validate or see how their predictions perform. So they create different models that are predicting when green up is going to happen based on different climate variables. And we can use our on-the-ground observations from observers to see whether those models are correct. And then we can also see how the timing of leaf out is changing from year to year, and how climate change is going to impact when those trees are leafing out. So here's another map that is looking at the colored leaves that have been reported by observers as part of this campaign. So these are 3 different genera. These are maples, oaks, and poplars, which are the 3 different types of trees that are part of this campaign. And you can see we have people all across the country that are reporting on when they first saw colored leaves in these trees. So some of these are a little bit on the early side. Sometimes trees will have colored leaves at weird times in the winter. Sometimes some of the trees have reddish leaf buds that come out in the springtime, and people think that those are colored leaves. So sometimes we get a few reports of that as well. But the majority of the colored leaves are happening in from the summer into the fall. So happening right now. So if we look a little bit more closely, this is a phenology calendar that's showing the same data, but just shown a different way. So each of the lines on here is indicating when an observer said yes to that colored leaves question for one of these different types of plants. So the red one there is maples, and then the orange one is the oaks, and then the yellow is the poplar, so things like aspen and balsam poplar. And we can see that the maples started out with their colored leaves the earliest. Some of them will change color earlier in the summer if there's drought conditions and they're feeling stressed. So they can have colored leaves that are on the earlier side. And these are all data from Western Washington as well. And we can compare Western Washington to other parts of the country because this is a national campaign. We can look at how people are reporting things maybe differently in different parts of the country. So we can see for these different genera in Western Washington, you were starting to see the colored leaves in the maples kind of earlier in the summer, with it really peaking starting around September, maybe mid-September. In the Northeast, it was a little bit earlier. So we're seeing more of a bump starting in the summertime, and then it really starting to increase more like mid to late August. So it might be that the relatively cooler temperatures up in the Northeast cause the trees to start to change color earlier in the year than they do here up in Western Washington. And then we can also look more closely at a particular species if we want. This is all from our visualization tool as well. So these are all graphs that you can make on your own if you're interested. You can just go to our website and look for the visualization tool, which is on the home page, and you can explore these kind of graphs too on your own. So this is looking at vine maples in Western Washington, and we can actually compare different years, which is a really interesting way to see how these plants are changing from year to year. So we can see that in each of the years, really the vine maples started to have colored leaves kind of earlier in the summer, even the springtime. And then it really started to increase more like the middle of the summer, maybe July and August. But there's a difference in between the years, and we can see that it seems like 2019 was a little bit on the earlier side than in the other years. So it's fun to explore these kind of patterns and see maybe if you remember that there was a certain year that was a lot warmer. You can see if you can see those patterns reflected in the phenology data and make your own graphs like this. So I wanted to end with just an invitation to everyone. I would love to have you participate with us in Nature's Notebook. We have as Carolyn mentioned, a landing page on SciStarter, so you can look us up there if you have an account, or make an account on SciStarter and then join us that way. And we have a couple other projects on SciStarter too, but Nature's Notebook is really the main one where you can look at all those different 1,300 species that we have available to monitor. And I hope that you enjoy tracking different signs of fall and then other seasons as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Erin. So I'm going to start sharing again. We're going to spend the rest of our time with Donna. She's going to ask you a few questions. And Erin, thank you so much for that presentation. That was super interesting, especially being able to see like the things that were localized to Washington State. Super cool. But I'll pass the mic to Donna now to ask Erin a few questions.
Thank you so much. My laptop is actually, I'm looking at it, but beyond it is my backyard. So it's kind of cool to hear some of the things you're saying. And I've got a couple of big leaf maples that are, starting to shed their leaves, and it's working from home. I've had a lot more time to pay attention to how things are changing. And it's really cool that for all of us that have spent a little bit more time paying attention to nature, we can actually do something useful with our observations and actually send them into you. I learned a lot of names of birds this spring, and I'm excited to see them come back next year as well. And it's cool to think that I could send you that data.
Yeah.
So can you tell us about some surprising findings that have come about because of Nature's Notebook? There been any?
So I don't know. I mean, I guess maybe they're not so much surprising, but they're significant, I would say. Just because, we kind of expect with a changing climate that we would start to see things changing. So we've had a number of studies that have looked at how things are shifting mostly earlier in the springtime, which is kind of what I would expect. So we had a study a couple of years ago that looked at that milkweed data and found that milkweed is shifting a few days earlier each year. And so there's a concern that milkweed will start to become mismatched with when the pollinators need it. So that's something that we're thinking of, and that's why we're continuing that the Nectar Connectors campaign, just so that we can keep track of when things are flowering and whether it's becoming further shifted in the future. I guess one thing that might be a more surprising finding, there was another set of researchers last year who found that there's a plant called camise that's in California. It's a very common plant there in the kind of shrublands. And it was actually a great indicator of fire danger, because they could look at when the different levels of fuel moisture in the plant, when it had different life cycle events. And they found that when the flowers were starting to die on the plant was when the fuel moisture was at its lowest. So instead of going out into the field with all of these like very technical gadgets and things to measure the fuel moisture, they could just see when the flowers were about done and then know that that was the point that was the highest risk. So it turned out to be this really simple way for them to use phenology to know about fire danger.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah.
I was thinking about another question I had. The Olympia Timberland Library, a local nonprofit, put in a food garden for us. And so we had some programs, and one was on how to save seeds. And that person that did the presentation, I can't remember her name now, but I remember her saying that our growing season has definitely shifted.
Mm-hmm.
And that you really can't use an old book on when to plant in Washington State because that has really shifted. How does Nature's Notebook, how do you collect that data about growing vegetables and planting seasons?
Yeah, that's definitely true. And I know that the recommendations for planting zones has shifted. Like they've even updated those to reflect the changes. It used to be here in Tucson, the time to plant tomatoes, the starter plants was March, and now it's mid-February. So it's shifted, I think, a month since I've moved to Tucson
Wow.
about 10 years ago. We do have some of those garden plants in Nature's Notebook. So you could definitely record that kind of stuff if you wanted to and keep track that way. And you would do that in the same way you would any of the kind of native plants that we have, where you would create an account and add those plants into your observation deck, and then keep track of when they're having their leaves and their flowers and their fruits over the course of the year.
Okay, great. Let's see this. Some of these we've already covered. What kinds of signs, I mean, can you predict a heavy pollen season, or are you just observing when the flowers are flowering? Are there other signs to look for? I've heard, oh, the weather's been like this, so that means we'll have a heavier pollen season. Is weather part of the observations as well? And what do you look for there?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple aspects to that. One is the timing of when the season starts, and the other would be like the intensity of it. And so you can really use phenology for both of those things. So in terms of the timing, there are these things called climate drivers, which are the things that cause a life cycle event to happen. So we could think about with some deciduous trees, it might be like a certain amount of temperature that's accumulated, or for plants here in the Southwest, it's a certain amount of precipitation that's accumulated. And then that triggers the plant to kind of switch from one life cycle stage to the next. So it starts to put on its flower buds or starts to put out its leaves. So if you know that, for example, like a juniper tree, it needs a certain amount of precipitation or temperature, then you can predict with models when it's going to have its flowers. And so you can kind of get a lead on when that pollen season is going to start, because you know that when the flowers open, that's when they're going to start to release their pollen. And then you could also use phenology by looking at just the number of flower buds that are on a tree. And it would be a shorter term forecast at that point, because you would have to look at, just in the week before they opened, how many flowers are on the plant. But you could get an idea of like how intense that season was going to be in terms of the pollen amount.
Great. Can you tell us about some of your citizen scientists? What is the Nature's Notebook community like?
It's pretty varied. So we have people that are, all the way from younger kids that are participating with their families, up to a lot of folks that are retired. I would say our main demographic, or the most common Nature's Notebook observer, is a retired person. A lot of times they are someone who's interested in gardening or bird watching, or just being outside in general. But some people are new to being in the outdoors as well. It's kind of like their first time they're dabbling in something like this. But we have everyone in between too. We have a lot of professionals as well that use Nature's Notebook. So I would say about half of our participants are what we call our backyard observers, people who are participating by setting up a site in their backyard or another place that they go to often. Maybe it's a nearby park or a trail. And then the other half are people that are like part of the National Park Service or the Fish and Wildlife Service. and they're using our platform and our tools to collect data for their organization.
And we actually have a question from a teacher who says, I asked my students to write a paper after they keep a record for 11 weeks on these observations. Do you think this is a good time period for them to observe? So 11 weeks and write a paper. And do you have suggestions of what kinds of assignments I can give my students besides writing a paper? This is an ENV 100 college freshman class.
Yeah, I think fall is great. I mean, there's lots of stuff happening at this time of year. You know, all the things that we've talked about with leaf color and the fruits on a lot of species are happening right now. Springtime is obviously a great time as well. If you're doing a spring course, just because there's just so much activity that happens in a short period of time, that would be another good period to focus on. And we have a number of different activities and resources for educators on our website. So if you go to naturesnotebook.org, there's a whole tab that we have, or menu that has education resources and lesson plans and things like that. So I would probably start there, but you can also email me and I can link you up with particular things.
So what's something you wish everyone knew about citizen science?
Oh, that's a great question. I guess the one thing that I wish everyone knew is that there's so many different types of citizen science programs. I mean, in my mind, I always have thought of things that you would do outside, like observing plants or birds, you know, all the big programs like eBird and iNaturalist are like the first things that would always come to mind for me. But there's so many different programs now. It's just amazing. So if you want to do something that's on your computer or something you can do in just 10 minutes or an hour, there's like opportunities for everyone. So I think don't feel like it's a huge commitment that you have to make. You know, if you're locking yourself into something that will take years, you can just dabble in it and try your hand at all sorts of different types of programs.
I have a quick question. I know we had some international folks on the line. If you're interested in studying phenology, but you're not in the US, how would you recommend people go about that?
Yeah, so if you are in Canada or Mexico, often we share a lot of the same species. So you can start an account just like you would here in the United States. We're just limited by the species that we have available. So if you're in another country and you have one of the species on our list, you can set up a site. There's nothing that stops you from doing that, you know, in the interface. But there are other phenology programs in some other countries. There's a pan-European phenology effort. There's there's Plant Watch in Canada as well. And I think a couple other countries have started to think about phenology programs. So yeah, I guess I would wonder what country it was in particular, but.
I know we had someone from Nigeria on the line.
Okay.
I'd probably
I don't know
recommend,
if there's a
I know
program
I
there.
see change. Phenology is not the main focus, but you can do some seasonal study on it.
And iNaturalist as well. I
That's
think they
true.
have some tags where you can say that like I'm looking at a flower. And we do have the ability to pull that information. So, you know, researchers can use our data in combination with data from other programs and it's really powerful that way. So
Awesome stuff. Donna, do you have any final questions for us?
No, I think that's it. But I mean, when you're asking about that, don't you have a way to search on SciStarter for where you are and what projects are available geographically to you?
100%. Donna, you're amazing. You're helping us sell the project finder here. Yes, that's a free tool that we have at SciStarter. We receive support from our different like federal agencies, other research affiliates internationally to bring all these different projects together and the SciStarter project finder. So for example, whoever added Nature's Notebook way back in the day, I think it was probably added when SciStarter first started because it's such an important project, you would have different tags like outside, could do on a hike. You know, you put the appropriate age group, and you can also search near me. So it would come up probably, I think Nature's Notebook probably on SciStarter is categorized, like Aaron said, for US and Canada and Mexico to an extent. But yeah, and I also, the educator who is on the line with us today, I'd really recommend using our SciStarter list feature. It's a new feature, but because Nature's Notebook is a SciStarter affiliate, if you added it to a list and you shared that list with your students, you'd be able to follow along with them and help them keep track of the number and frequency of their contributions. So that's a new thing that you're welcome to try. If you search lists on our SciStarter blog, you'll find instructions for how to use that. So we made that with educators in mind with the pandemic, because so many people were saying, oh my gosh, I don't know how I'm going to engage my students when we can't be together in the classroom. And like citizen science brings us together even if we're physically apart. Erin, do you have any last thoughts for us before we go?
Yeah, I would mention that we have a whole other kind of platform in Nature's Notebook for people that are observing with groups. So if you're at a library or another organization, we make it really easy for you to create your own a customized group in our system. We call it a local phenology program. And we have lots and lots of resources to help you do that. We even have an online course that you can take. That's a 10-week course to walk you through that. And it's just a great way to engage a group of people in monitoring the same plants and animals at a location. So I'm happy to answer more questions about that if people want to email me, or there's lots of stuff on our website about it.
That's awesome. I need to do that for my local library. That'd be so cool. Cool stuff. So I think we're in our last few minutes now. Donna, I think our final call to action is the library takeout that's available for folks, right, from 1 to 5 p.m. on select days.
Yes.
Cool stuff. And visit trl.org/takeout for more details on that. I'll also put the link in the follow-up email for this from this event for the locals in Washington State and Mason County. And also use your library's resources to check out the Field Guide to Citizen Science. It's a SciStarter's book. It was co-authored by our founder and some other SciStarter advisors. Nature's Notebook it has a shout out in the book, as well as some other citizen science projects. And like Erin said earlier, there are citizen science projects. It's really growing. It's a movement that's sweeping the world, and it's across all different fields of science. So feel free to read this book to learn a little bit more about the field of citizen science. And I thought I'd mention it because Nature's Notebook gets a shout out in it. And also I mentioned that scistarter.org/NLM page. I put Nature's Notebook on there as well, but we also have some additional library projects you can try out there. And you can also make your SciStarter account all on that page. And just in conclusion, I want to say a big thank you to Erin for doing the work she does with Nature's Notebook, Donna for organizing this and being a leader in her community, and to my colleague Robin Salthouse, who's also on the line, who helped set things up on the SciStarter side. If our panel doesn't have anything else, I think we'll conclude for the day and let everyone go and do Nature's Notebook. All right, I think that's it for today. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm just going to check the chat to make sure nobody had any questions. People just said that they enjoyed it and they're loving using citizen science in the classroom. So cool. Yeah, for the educator on the line, definitely take that class that Erin mentioned. That would probably give you good tips to engage your students. All right. Bye, everybody. Thanks, Erin. Thanks,
Thanks,
Donna.
everyone.
Thanks, Robin.